and David often visits his friends at Ruth's place. He has 3 friends who are brothers, and their mom is called Ruth, and Ruth is the cool mom. She lets the boys drink beer and just do things that David's parents wouldn't let them do, and the other parents on the block wouldn't let them do. He has some other friends in town as well, like Eddie and Denise, who are brother and sister. And at some point, 2 new girls move into town, and they move in with Ruth because Ruth is their aunt, I think. It was a weird family thing, but Ruth is family of the 2 girls, and the girls are called Meg and Susan. Meg is 13, I think, when she moves in, and Susan is younger. And Susan and Meg's parents died in a car crash. Meg was left with a scar on her arm, and Susan was left with leg and arm injuries, so she wears leg braces and arm braces. And I'm just gonna read you the back synopsis. It's very short, it's only 3 lines of text. A teenage girl is held captive and brutally tortured by neighborhood children. Based on a true story, this shocking novel reveals the depravity of which we are all capable. So this book is about a girl getting tortured. And the girl is Meg, the older sister that moved in. Ruth starts hitting both Meg and her little sister Susan, but she turns her attention mostly towards Meg. And her sons and the other neighborhood children join in, and they start beating her, burning her, sexually abusing her, depriving her of food and water, humiliating her. So that's what the story is about. And I read in the author's note that he chose to have the narrator be one of the boys, David, because that boy is facing a moral dilemma. He is one of the boys who is in on Meg's torture, but he likes Meg most of the time, so he doesn't torture her as much. In the end, he doesn't at all. He tries to help her. And I kind of hate David. I don't sympathize with him. He should have told from the beginning, and at one point he didn't tell the police because he knew that he was an accomplice. So he'd rather let Meg get tortured than go to juvenile prison. And this book was very hard to read. Who said it? Cemetery Dance? No, it's one of the... this is the synopsis, and these are all just reviews. Cemetery Dance says, definitely not for the faint of heart, which I am. I've noticed that with this book. It was very hard to get through. It was only 300 pages. Should have taken me 3 or 4 days, but it took me a little over a week to read this because I needed to breathe every few pages. It's definitely haunting. Even when I put the book away, the story just stayed with me. At one point it was all I could think about, and I didn't understand why Jack Ketchum, who is a respected author, would write a story like this, almost like torture porn, and why Stephen King would have anything to say about a story like this, good or bad, you know. And also I felt it really unbelievable that Ruth would join in, because it was a kid's game. They talk about the game in the book, and the game is basically where the kids torture, all of the neighborhood kids torture one particular kid, and they wanted to get Meg in the game, and Ruth kind of took over, and she initiated the torture, but it was kind of the kids' idea, and I thought no adult would do this. Even, adults torture children, it happens. They lock children in basements and they torture them, but they don't get neighborhood children involved, right? They don't want any witnesses to that, and who could trust children, But then I remembered on the back it said based on a true story. So I looked that story up, and it is based on the torture and murder of Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Likens and her sister Jenny Likens were taken in by a woman who was a mother of 5 and a divorcee. And their parents were still alive, but they were with the carnival, so they moved around a lot. And their father would send the woman checks. But sometimes the checks would be late, and she would hit the girls when that happened. And she started to enjoy it. Apparently, she focused her attention on Sylvia, just like Ruth did on Meg. And she locked Sylvia in a basement. She got neighborhood children to beat her, to sexually abuse her, to burn her, to mark her. And they deprived her of food. They humiliated her in the worst ways a person can. I'm not going to say too much about that real story. This is a book review, and I don't want to talk too much about the real story. It's sickening, and but this book had a movie made that was based on it, and it's also called The Girl Next Door, 2007, not 2013. That one's a comedy, but 2007. I couldn't watch the whole movie. I skipped through it a bit, but it seems to be very true to the book. There's also a movie based on Sylvia Likens' story, which I also skipped through a bit. I did watch a documentary on the Sylvia Likens torture murder. It seems to have been mostly out of jealousy. The woman who did this was poor. She was a divorcee, 5 kids that her husband had left her with. And Sylvia, was a young girl. She had the whole world in front of her. She was pretty. And in this book, it's made apparent that Ruth also tortures Meg because she is jealous of Meg, and not of the little sister. She's in back braces, or in leg braces and arm braces. And in the real story, the sister Jenny Likens also had braces because she had polio. Yeah, this story, it reminded me a bit of Lolita. I talked about that in one of my videos, where you learn a bit about yourself, about how you see things. Because with Lolita, because of the way that Humbert described wanting to have sex with a child, you get more and more used to the idea. It doesn't become right, but I didn't get as emotional as I read further and further with Lolita, and the same with The Girl Next Door. I kind of get used to the idea. The more I learned about the real story, the more I read this story. I didn't get as emotional. The last 50 pages were the easiest, and not because the torture was over, because it wasn't yet, but also the aftermath is also really bad. But on the one hand, it made it easier for me to know that this was a real story, because I felt kind of weird reading it as it just being the sick fantasy of this one author. But it's not. It's more like he's reporting on something that happened. He's trying to people understand, how that felt to be Sylvia Likens or to be one of the boys. So it makes it easier to read it, I think, to know the real story behind it. And a lot of the things that happen in this book really happen to Sylvia Likens. Not all of it. And he says in the author's note that he left some things out. He couldn't put all of it in. It would be torture porn. If you put everything in, it would be nothing but torture and would be very sickening. But he put a lot of it in, and he changed some things. So again, I just have my notes here. The book. The first sentence, I can read it to you. You think you know about pain. That's the first sentence. And if you read the back of the book, it seems like the author is getting right into it and talking about, introducing the torture immediately. But then you get, it's kind of misleading. Well, it's diverting expectations of the reader, because when you read on, you think you know about pain. Talk to my second wife. She does. Or she thinks she does. She says that once when she was 19 or 20, she got between a couple of cats fighting, her own cat and a neighbor's, and one of them went at her, climbed her like a tree, tore gashes out of her thighs and breasts and belly that you can still see today. Scared her so badly she fell back against her mother's turn-of-the-century hosier, breaking her best ceramic pie plate and scraping 6 inches of skin off her ribs, while the cat made its way back down her again, all tooth and claw spitting fury. 36 stitches, I think she said she got, and a fever that lasted days. My second wife says that's pain. She doesn't know shit, that woman. So, at first it kind of diverts the reader's expectation, it's, you think with the first sentence that he's gonna go right into the torture of Megan Laughlin, but he doesn't. He goes into a story about his second wife, which means that he's older now, because, in the back you already read that she gets tortured by neighborhood children, and this guy's on his second wife already. And also it sets the expectation of how bad the torture is going to be, because what happened to his second wife is already really bad and really painful and traumatic. And then you read, that she thinks that's pain, she doesn't know shit. It's going to get way, way worse for Megan. And it does. What I like about this book, it's a while before we get to the torture and like the main plot. I don't know, it's like after page 100, at least that I could find right now. It takes a while to get to the main plot. Before that, the scene is set, the characters are established, their relationships to Meg. We see them in different settings. The game that the kids play, where they do anything they want to one of their friends, that is explained. And it makes it more of a novel. You get to know the characters. It's not just the story as we know it, as what happened with Sylvia Likens. It's more like it's one of the things that happened, but it's really important that you know who Meg is and who the kids are. I'm not that interested in the kids, to be honest. I'm interested in Meg's backstory. She describes very strong. Everybody, she is intrigued by her because she's the new girl, but David really likes her. They go to the carnival together and she makes a painting for him. But with the boys, you already know that they're gonna be awful to her, and that makes me not care about their backstories. Like Eddie and his sister Denise get hit by their dad, and I get what the author is trying to do. They all have backstories. David, his parents are in the middle of a divorce. Ruth's kids, have Ruth as a mother who constantly says, you're no good father, left me with the three of you. And yeah, she lets them drink beer and lets them, do things that other parents wouldn't let their kids do, but that's only because she doesn't really give a shit. So they all have like a sad backstory, but that is obviously no excuse, and that makes me not even care. I do want to tell you guys a bit about how David, the narrator, saw Meg before the torture happened. Let's see if I can find that. We just kept walking together, me not saying anything, just looking at him and not really seeing him either. Seeing Meg, it was a very special moment. I know Meg attained a certain glamour for me then. Certainly it was not just that she was pretty or smart or able to handle herself crossing the brook. She was almost unreal, like no one I'd ever met or was likely to meet outside of books or the matinee. Like she was fiction, some sort of heroine. I pictured her back by the rock and now saw this person who was really brave lying next to me. I saw horror, suffering, survival, disaster, tragedy. I also will let the author explain the game to you, because it's very intricate. In the game, one guy was it. He was the commando. His safe territory was the orchard. The rest of us were a platoon of soldiers bivouacked a few yards away up on a hill near the brook, where smaller kids who'd once played King of the Mountain. We were an odd bunch of soldiers in that we had no weapons. We'd lost them, I guess, during some battle. Instead, it was the commando who had the weapons, apples from the orchard, as many as he could carry. In theory, he also had the advantage of surprise. Once he was ready, he'd sneak from the orchard through the brush and raid our camp. With luck, he could bob at least one of us with an apple before being seen. The apples were bombs. If you could hit with an apple, you were dead, you were out of the game. So the object was to hit as many guys as you could before getting caught. You always got caught. That was the point. The commando never won. You got caught because, for one thing, everybody else was sitting on a fairly good-sized hill watching and waiting for you, and unless the grass was very high and you were very lucky, you had to get seen. So much for the element of surprise. Second was 7 against 1, and you had just a single safe base back at the orchard yards away. So here you were flying wildly over your shoulder, running like crazy back to your base with a bunch of kids like a pack of dogs at your heels, and maybe you'd get 1 or 2 or 3 of them, but eventually they'd get you, and as I say, that was the point. Because the captured commando got tied to a tree in the grove, arms tied behind his back, legs hitched together. He was gagged, he was blindfolded, and the survivors could do anything they wanted to him while the others, even the dead guys, looked on. Sometimes we all went easy and sometimes not. The raid took maybe half an hour, the capture could take all day. At the very least, it was scary. And the game changes a bit when Eddie's sister Denise joins in. She wants to be commando all the time. And when she gets captured, she gets tied to a tree, just like the rest, but she gets stripped, so she's naked. And Denise in the book seems to really enjoy that, and all the guys kind of don't like her for that. She's not supposed to enjoy it. With Meg, it starts when the boys are having a kind of a sleepover. They are camping, in a tent in the backyard. And they decide to spy on Meg. They go climb up a tree and look at her through a window. And Meg doesn't get naked in front of the window. So even Dave starts to get angry at her, like it's her fault that they didn't get to see her naked. While right before that, Dave really wants to make Meg happy. Let's see if I can find that. Yeah, he asked Meg to the carnival and they get in a Ferris wheel. Then the wheel began turning and she laughed, and I thought it was the happiest, nicest sound I'd ever heard. I felt proud of myself for asking her, for making her happy and making her laugh the way she did. David really cared about her, but then while he was spying on her, he noticed, that he was getting angry, and he didn't get, because he was the last one to go up the tree. And he didn't get while the others were getting so angry, but then he was like, yeah, I was getting angry too, angry at her. He didn't stay angry all the way though, it's just the little things that made him, I think a little less of her, little things that happened, like Ruth is hitting Meg and her sister Susan a lot. She isn't getting tortured yet, I think that was before that. And she goes to a police officer and she tells the police officer, Ruth is hitting me and my sister, and the police officer says, I'll go check it out, I guess. Like, he doesn't really believe her, but he goes by the house and Ruth tells him some shitty story, some bullshit story. And the officer leaves, and first, all the boys are kind of in awe that she dared to go against an adult like that, to go to the police. As David says, kids get beaten, they get humiliated by their parents, and you slam the door, you get angry at your parents, you yell at them, but you don't defy them, you don't go to the police, and she did. But then nothing came of it. The police did nothing to help. And the boys kind of get angry at her. As David explains, they are reminded of how powerless they are as children. There's nothing they can do when their parents, hit them or do bad stuff to them. And Meg reminded them of that. Like, going to the police was always an option that no one dared to take. But Meg showed that it wasn't an option at all. So that's another instance where David temporarily hates Meg. But Meg tells David she doesn't understand why Ruth is so mean to her before the torture happens. There's a big part of the book before that, which isn't too bad. Still Ruth made me really angry reading that first part, because she terrorizes the girls for no good reason. But Meg tells David, I don't know why Ruth hates me so much. And she says, I used to paint, but now I don't, because I know what Ruth would say about that. She would say it's stupid. And David says, maybe paint something for Ruth. She says, no, I couldn't. And David said, well, why don't you paint something for me? And she does. And she paints a boy lying on his belly on the brook where they met. And David gets a frame for it and gives it to Ruth and says, this is for Meg, for you. And Ruth looks at the painting and she's like, no, there's a boy lying here, this is obviously made for you. And then something happens that happened in a real story as well. She says to Meg, I hope that's all you gave him. I don't want you to get pregnant. If you're going to be a slut opening your legs for every boy, we're going to have a problem. And that is what actually happened with Sylvia Likens. Apparently she told the person she was living with, that woman, that she had a boyfriend somewhere. And she said, she asked Sylvia, have you done anything with him? She didn't understand the question. She was like, yeah, I guess we went to the movies or something like that. and she started convincing Sylvia that she was pregnant now, even though she hadn't done anything yet. So it happened a little differently here, but you could see the reaction from the other kids. They just laughed, they didn't say anything. They didn't seem to be uncomfortable except for David. So I just found it, page 127 is when the torture in the basement starts. With Sylvia Likens, she was kicked in the groin so much she was forced to insert a cola bottle up her vagina, and because of all the abuse she became incontinent, so she would wet the bed, and that's why she had to stay in the basement. In this story, Meg, so the name's it's Megan. Megan needs to be in the basement because they're playing the game, which Ruth is now in on, because the boys told their mother, and I guess she liked the idea. Let's look at how it started. At the doorway to the shelter, there's a bomb shelter in the basement. Ruth stood watching. She smiled and moved aside to let me by. I tried to run away, she said, but Willie stopped her. They were stopping an hour wide, all of them, Willie and Ruth and Donnie all together, going at her like a tackle dummy against the concrete wall, taking turns smashing it into her stomach. She was already long past arguing about it. All I heard was the whoosh of breath as Donnie hit her and drove her tightly folded arms into her belly. Her mouth was set, grim, a hard concentration in her eyes, and for a moment she was the heroine again, battling the odds. And he talks about, why he didn't stop anything from happening to Meg. I've asked myself since, when did it happen? When was I, corrupted? And I keep coming back to exactly this moment, these thoughts, that sense of power. It didn't occur to me to consider that this was only a power granted to me by Ruth, and perhaps only temporary. At the time it was quite real enough. As I watched, the distance between Meg and me seemed suddenly huge, insurmountable. It was not that my sympathies toward her stopped, but for the first time I saw her as essentially other than me. She was vulnerable, I wasn't. In the real court case that happened with Sylvia Likens, the kids were asked, "Why did you do it?" And they all said, "I don't know." They also said that Ruth, the real Ruth, I forgot her name, doesn't matter, but that woman made them do it or told them to do it, which is not an excuse, because a lot of them, had a safe place to hide, they could just go home, tell their parents, tell the police. No one did. Susan, the sister, was a big part of this story. Whenever Meg didn't want to do something or talked back, Ruth would get Susan. Meg loved Susan a lot, and Susan would get punished for whenever Meg did something Ruth didn't like. So Ruth had that power over Meg even when she stopped caring about her own pain. She just wanted to hurt them back. She couldn't because Ruth had Susan. And she made Susan watch. And this is what really happened. Jenny Likens was forced to watch the torture of her sister, Sylvia Likens. It's all really messed up. The jealousy, as I said, is made apparent in this book as well. Ruth is jealous of Meg. Let's see. I'm sorry I have less energy. I can't be happy-go-lucky and talk about a book like this. But it seems to me more likely that was precisely because she was beautiful and strong and we were not, that Ruth and the rest of us had done this to her, to make a sort of judgment on that beauty and what it meant and didn't mean to us. Because Ruth went really bonkers. She raged around the room, tearing at things and jabbering crazy stuff about how she never got out anymore, not to a movie or dinner or dancing or parties. All she ever did was sit here minding these goddamn fucking kids, cleaning, ironing, making lunch and breakfast. She was getting old in there, old, her good years gone, her body gone all to hell on her, all the time slamming at the walls and the wire mesh screen over the window on the work table, kicking Eddie's Coke bottle until it smashed against the wall. And then she said something like, and you, to Meg, and started so furious, like it was her fault that Ruth's body was going and she couldn't go out anymore, and called her a whore and a slut and no good fucking trash, and then hauled off and kicked her twice between her legs. And now she had bruises there, terrible bruises. I have said that this book was hard for me to read, that it was haunting, sickening, and I wouldn't recommend it. I'd feel weird about recommending a book like this to anyone, but I would not, expressly not recommend it either. It's a good book. It's well written. It's very good representation, I guess, of what happened. It's definitely not for everyone. It's barely for me. I don't regret reading it, but this sort of stuff will definitely stay with me for a long time. I don't want to give off the wrong impression. It's not bad. It's not a bad book. It's not a bad story. I mean, what happens is bad, obviously, but that's with a lot of stories. It's just so out there, I guess. It's not something you would normally expect from a book and an author like this. But it's definitely not a bad book. There are a few scenes in this book and in the movies that will stay with you, also because this really happened to Sylvia Likens. It happens to Megan in the book. Some of the things happen to Sylvia Likens, and there are two things that happened to Sylvia Likens which are very shocking. One of them is the shower scene. And I'll just read this to you, a bit of it. They are letting Meg upstairs so she can shower. Ruth stood up. God damn it, don't you sass me, girl. If I say behind you, then it's behind you. Her arms tied behind her. And if I say stuff up your ass, then they'll do that too. Don't you sass me, you hear? God damn it, condemn you. I'll wash you, that's how. Now do as I say, fast. I could see that Meg was scared, but she didn't resist as Donnie took her arms behind her and tied them at the wrists. She closed her eyes again, only this time there were little pulls of red around them. Alright, Edwin, said Ruth. She leaned over and turned on the tap in the bathtub. The tap marked H for hot. That tap only. She let it run a while. She tested with her hand, letting it run down over the rubber glove. Her mouth was a grim, straight line. The steam threw a mist over all of us now. Suddenly Meg felt it and knew what it meant. She opened her eyes and threw herself back, frightened, screaming, but Donnie already had one arm and Ruth grabbed the other. She fought them, bucking and twisting, screaming, no, no, and she was strong. She was still strong. Ruth lost her grip. God damn you, she bellowed. You want me to get your sister? You want me to get your precious Susan? You want her in here instead, burning? Meg whirled on her, suddenly furious, wild, insane. Yes, she screamed. Yes, you bitch. Get Susan. Get her. I don't give a damn anymore. Ruth looked at her eyes narrowed. Then she looked at Willie. She shrugged. Get her, she said mildly. You didn't have to. I turned as he passed me and then saw him stop because Susan was there already, watching us, standing in the hall. She was crying too. Meg saw her too, and she crumbled. No, she cried. No, please. For a moment we stood silent in the warm, heavy mist, listening to the scalding stream and to her sobbing. Knowing what would happen, knowing how it would be. Then Ruth threw the curtain aside. Get her in, she said to Donnie, and be careful of yourself. I watched them put her in and Ruth adjust the shower nozzle. She sent the scorching spray up slowly over her legs and thighs and belly and finally up over her breasts, to shadow across her nipples, while her arms strained desperately to break free behind her. And everywhere the water hit went suddenly red, the colour of pain, and at last I couldn't stand the screaming, and I ran. It was a bright sunny morning toward the end of July, 3 weeks into Meg's captivity, when I first went over and found him there. In a few days since the shower, they'd let her keep her clothes on. There were blisters and they were allowing them to heal. They were treating her pretty well, all told. So I want to tell you a bit about Susan. But unless it hurt, Meg was usually quiet now. After the dog shit incident, it was hard to humiliate her, and not much could scare her. She seemed resigned, as though maybe all she had to do was wait. And maybe we'd all get bored by this eventually, and it would pass. She rarely rebelled. If she did, we'd just call in Susan. Most of the time it didn't come to that. She'd climb out of or into her clothes pretty much on command now. Out of only when we knew Ruth wasn't going to be around, or if Ruth herself suggested it, which wasn't very often. So Susan was called anytime Meg wouldn't do anything. Susan was very passive. She didn't show emotions a lot. Toward the end she did. She started crying and screaming a lot when she knew that Meg was really hurting. When she knew that Meg would probably not live. Something else that really happened to Sylvia Likens, and that happened to Meg in his book. Eddie was there every day after that for about a week. On the second day, Sister Denise came too. Together they force-fed her crackers, which she couldn't really eat because the gag had been on overnight again, and they denied her water. Eddie got mad and smacked her across the mouth with an aluminum curtain rod, bending the rod and leaving a broad red welt across her cheek, cutting her lower lip. So this really happened to Sylvia. They denied her water. She was force-fed crackers, which she couldn't eat because she was so dehydrated. And then she was beaten across the head with a rod, which bent because of the beating. Something else that really happened. I wrote down the pages, but I don't feel like reading it right now. It's probably the worst thing that happened, and it happened in real life. Meg, in this book, gets branded. Ruth takes a needle from a sewing kit. She heats it up in a flame, and she carves in Meg's skin. In the book, she carves, "I fuck me," and she carves, I think, 3 letters of it, and every kid except for David gets to do 2 letters. David didn't want it. He was offered it though. In the real story, the woman began with the quote, and then one of the boys, I think her son, finished it. And what was written on Sylvia's body was, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." With the same tactic, half burnt, half cut into the skin. In the real story, a giant S was burned right under Sylvia's breast. In this story, Meg's clitoris is burnt out. I think, using an iron. Used for like ironing clothes. And I want to say a bit about the aftermath of this all. David eventually tries to help Meg escape. Right before the branding incident, Meg was told by David to escape and that they would come back for Susan. Meg instead doesn't want to leave without Susan, and she gets caught going into Susan's room, and she has to go back to the basement, and she gets burned there. And David comes to watch because he left some money for Meg, and he finds in the morning that the money is still there, so he knows Meg didn't make it out. David tries to run out of the room when he sees what they're doing to her, but he gets caught. And now Susan, Meg and David, all three of them, are captives in the basement. But David, of course, will be missed because he's not coming home and his parents are expecting him to come home. So eventually the police man comes an hour and a half after Meg dies from her injuries. Susan and David get saved though. I lit the candle. Its honey glow filled the shelter. It made me feel better. Until I saw Meg. Until we both did. She lay on her back, covered to the waist with an old, thin, dirty sheet they'd thrown over her. Her breasts and shoulders were bare. She had bruises everywhere. Her burns were open and liquid oozing. Even in her sleep, the muscles of her face pulled her skin tight with pain. Her body trembled. The writing glistened. Fuck me. I looked at Susan and could see she was going to cry again. Turn away, I said, because it was bad. All of it was bad. Worst of all was not what they'd done to her, but what she was doing to herself. Her arms were outside the sheet she slept. The dirty, jagged fingernails of her hand worked constantly and deep against her left elbow, all the way down to her wrist. She was tearing at the scar, tearing it open. The body abused and beaten was turning finally against itself. The police officers come, and Ruth doesn't want to tell them anything. She tells them, she keeps saying, I want a lawyer, but then she says something. Ruth murmured something. What? Asked Jennings. She was talking into her chest, mumbling. I can't hear you, lady. Ruth's head shot up, eyes glaring. I said she was a slut, said Ruth. She wrote those words. She did. Fuck me. You think I wrote them? She wrote them herself, on herself, because she was proud of it. I was trying to teach her to discipline her, to show her some decency. She wrote it just to spite me. Fuck me. She did. She fucked everybody. She fucked him, that's for sure. She pointed at me. Then I really and on him. And him too. She fucked them all. She'd have fucked little Ralphie if I hadn't stopped her and tied her up down here, where nobody had to see her legs and her ass and her cunt. Because mister, that's all she was, a cunt. A woman who don't know any better than to give in to a man anytime he asks for a piece of pussy. And I did her a goddamn favour. So fuck you and what you think. Goddamn meat in a uniform, big soldier, big shit. Fuck you, I did her a goddamn favour. Lady, said Jennings, I think you should shut up now. He leaned in close, and it was like he was looking at something he'd stepped in on the sidewalk. You understand my meaning, lady, Mrs. Chandler? Please, I really hope you do. That piss trap you call a mouth, you keep it shut. In the beginning, we saw that this was written by David when he was an adult, already on his second wife. His parents never got over it. He says his father was ashamed of him. His mother kept a clipping of the obituary of Meg and Ruth, and another clipping on the paper one of Ruth's children, Rufa, killed 2 kids. He raped them, stabbed them, and then burned them. And on the back is written, I wonder how the other 2 kids are doing, Rufa's brothers, Ruth's 2 other children. His parents both die, and with his 3rd fiancée, he goes to the house and he finds those clippings. You never know what goes through people's head, and I wonder how how the boys that did that to her and a few girls, to Sylvia, how they're feeling, what's going on with them. I know one of them actually became like Rufa. He led a life of crime and he was in and out of prison. One of them became a minister of a church, and I don't know what happened with the others. But the murder and torture of Sylvia Likens happened in the 60s. The woman who did this to her died of cancer. She died outside of prison. She was let out for parole. All the boys are out of prison as well, except for that one, maybe. Yeah, I wonder, you can't live a normal life after you've seen and done this, right? In the author's note, Jack Ketchum also talks about hearing the story for the first time. He says that really stayed with him. He was angry when he read it. He couldn't let it go. So he decided to write a book about it, and that's this book. Again, it's not bad. I'm not going to recommend it to anyone. I don't know, it just feels weird, but it's definitely not bad. So, as a final note, let's just read what other people had to say about it. So, Stephen King says, "The girl next door is alive. It does not just promise terror, but actually delivers it." And it sure does. Bentley Little, Ketchum is one of America's best and most consistent writers of contemporary horror fiction. Fangoria. Just when you think the worst has already happened, Jack Ketchum goes yet another shock further. Locus, this is the real stuff, an uncomfortable dip into the pitch blackness. Cemetery Dance, the reader, even though repulsed by the story, cannot look away. Definitely not for the faint of heart. Afraid magazine. Realism is what makes this novel so terrifying. The monsters are human and all the more horrifying for it. Hell Notes. For 2 decades now, Jack Ketchum has been one of our best, brightest and most reliable. Ed Gorman, a major voice in contemporary suspense. Midwest Book Review. Jack Ketchum is a master of suspense and horror of the human variety. So, that was my review of this book. I hope you liked it. If you did, please give it a like. And if you want to read this book, know what to expect. It makes it a lot easier.